Greetings everyone and welcome to today's webinar, part of Schulich School's webinar series on shaping the post-pandemic world. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, my name is Preet Olak and I'm the Associate Dean of Research at Schulich. I'll be hosting the webinar and moderating the Q&A session. So here's a quick agenda for today's webinar. We will start with some brief introductions. This will be followed by the formal presentation from our speaker, whose choice of music you just heard over the last few minutes, and I'll introduce her in a few minutes. Thereafter, we will take your questions. Please submit your questions anytime during the presentation and the Q&A session. The session will end with some concluding remarks from the speaker, and then we'll end it at that point. So it gives me great pleasure in formally introducing today's speaker, Professor Ellen Auster. Dr. Auster earned her PhD from Cornell University and taught at Columbia and Dartmouth before moving up north to Canada. She is currently Professor of Strategic Management at the Schulich School of Business and Executive Director, York Change Leadership, an internal York University startup providing pan-university strategic change and skills strengthening. Professor Auster has more than 25 years of experience as an academic and consultant, specializing in the art of strategic, agile, people-powered change. She is the recipient of the prestigious Global Lifetime Achievement Academy of Management Distinguished Educator Award, and her most recent book, Agility, Excelling at Strategic Changes, co-authored with Lisa Hillerbrand, was listed by Forbes as one of the 16 best books for creative leaders. She is thus uniquely qualified to help us navigate ultra-dynamic change brought upon us by the current pandemic. So welcome, Ellen, and look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you so very much, Preet, for that lovely introduction, and to you and Ashwin Joshi for including me in this amazing lineup of webinars that we've had so far, and actually more to come. So happy Tuesday and a warm, warm welcome to everyone. Thank you so much for joining us from all over the world. I'm just going to share my slides now and get those going. 1 second here. So I think you've got them up now. So I'm so delighted to share today my latest thinking on Stragility. Stragility is always about strategic, agile, people-powered change. But this talk today is geared really specifically towards navigating this pandemic we're all coping with, COVID. And today's talk, what I'm going to do is focus on some common pain points. I've been talking to lots of leaders over the last 2+ months. And so I'm going to focus on some of those pain points and some practical action-oriented tips and tools for strategically navigating even crazy, tumultuous, relentless, what I'm calling ultra-dynamic change like we're facing now. And this webinar nicely complements some of the other speeches and talks we've had so far. Moshe Farjun's talk on strategic lenses that we can view this pandemic through, and Matthias Kipping's historical perspective on the repeating nature of pandemics and the role of leaders, as well as last week's panel talk on entrepreneurial resilience. So in my talk today, I'm going to highlight leadership tips and tools and also some personal sort of tips and tools for navigating this ultra dynamic change. And then we'll open it up to your questions and comments and insights. So let's get started. I'm just going to get my slides going here, and feel free to pop questions into the Q&A as we go. You don't have to wait till the end. Okay, so here we go. So ultra dynamic change is sort of our new normal as we're all experiencing it. And we all may be feeling a little bit like Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz, who wakes up one morning and says, I've got a feeling I'm not in Kansas anymore, right? So for us, it's not really flying monkeys and good witches and bad witches and munchkins, but it is sort of an altered reality that's very different from probably anything that most of us have experienced anymore. So this coronavirus pandemic of 2020, right? It's not only the pandemic itself, but it's all the ripple effects that emerge from that. And we've had so many great webinars on some of those ripple effects and their impacts. both macro to micro, right? And so it permeates every facet of our lives and every really level of analysis. And so I'm going to focus a little less on sort of the content of the ripple effects and more on some tips and tools for navigating all those ripple effects. So more specifically, I'm going to focus today on 4 common pain points. The first is feeling overwhelmed or paralyzed, right? With so much coming at us, a barrage of stuff coming out of us. A lot of us may be feeling overwhelmed or paralyzed. I know I have certainly cycled through that. A second is struggling with reinvention, right? We have to be so creative and so adaptive and morphing all the time. How do we do that, especially when we're feeling a bit overwhelmed? Third is finding team leadership challenging, right? So we're all, or well, not all of us, but most of us, many of us are working remote. How do we keep our teams aligned and rowing together amidst that virtual context and all this change? And fourth is anxious about the future. So we're going to dive into those pain points and then some tips and tools. So this first pain point, feeling overwhelmed or paralyzed. And the stagility skill here is to prioritize our pain points, recognizing our circle of control. So this matrix is actually adapted from Eisenhower, who when faced with overwhelming tasks used to say, I just want to focus on what's most urgent and important. And we can sort of take those 2 criteria and build a little matrix, and it may help us sort of and prioritize when we're feeling overwhelmed. So imagine we can list all our to-dos, or if all our to-dos are just way too overwhelming, the other thing we can do is list our to-dos by swim lane, right? Or sphere, sort of work, family, care, home. And so start with our to-do list for that particular swim lane or sphere, and to identify and map really what are those ones that are both important and urgent. And those would be the high priority tasks for us to focus in on, right? Those are in no time like the present. Then we can still look at those that are most sort of very important or more important, but maybe a little less urgent. And the trick here is to schedule time for them. It's really easy to just keep having them reappear on our to-do lists, and that sort of eventually starts to gnaw at us. So for those more important but a little less urgent, schedule a time and maybe an outer limit where, you know what, that's sort of the drop dead deadline where I've got to get this done. Then if we go to the less important, there may be some tasks that are less important but actually pretty urgent. Maybe we can delegate those, or maybe we can divide and conquer them with our team. And finally, in the lowest quadrant over here in the lower left corner, those things that are less important and less urgent. And the first hard question to ask there is, you know, maybe we can eliminate them, just completely take them off our to-do list. Maybe we can postpone them. You know, we say, not really now in the midst of COVID. What we need to do is postpone them and think about, maybe we get to them after COVID. Or maybe it's a quick win, right? So maybe it's something that's a quick win that we can just knock off when we're a little less energetic, sort of whether it's the organizational or your actual house sort of kitchen drawer equivalent. So when I'm a little low energy, I'll clean that out. So a matrix for thinking about how to sort of map our tasks, urgent and important. Another piece here is thinking about our circle of control. So to then revisit that most important, most urgent, and think about what's actually within our circle of control that we can focus and invest effort on. And so many things are not within our circle of control in this pandemic. So zooming in on those that we actually can manage ourselves, right, and get done. We also want to think about pushing the boundaries on our circle of influence. So circle of influence are those things that are outside our circle of control, but maybe we can mold and shape a bit. So that might be like concerts and symphonies that are now putting on virtual live streaming events, right? They can't control the fact that they won't have live audiences, but they can offer up an opportunity for folks to engage through a virtual event and see who comes. The third is to sort of monitor our circle of observation for shifting conditions. So let's say we've got a new product line that we were thinking about right before COVID hit, and it's not really in our circle of control now because maybe so much is in flux, but we can sort of monitor what's happening and see when an opportunity might arise that it makes sense to launch that product line. So how do we help sort of navigate feeling overwhelmed or paralyzed? It's about thinking about that important and urgent matrix and also our circle of control, influence, and observation. Alrighty, on to our next pain point, struggling with reinvention. So now we know what we're going to do, but we still may be struggling with how do we come up with the creative ideas that we need to adapt and morph. So the skill here is collective solutioning, leveraging our opportunities and strengths. And to start that, we really need all three of these sort of elements, collective divergent brainstorming. The collective piece is so important now. We may not have all the information we need to make decisions at our fingertips or even to come up with new ideas. So the notion that we work collectively to do the brainstorming, tapping into everybody's knowledge from all over the organization. Divergent is about thinking really open-mindedly, sort of tabula rasa, blank slate as we go in. It's so tempting to just sort of build on the past or think incrementally, but divergent brainstorming is really about thinking fresh, sort of what are the most breakthrough ideas, the best possible solutions for solving this challenge. And as we brainstorm, we want to both look externally, scanning for opportunities and reapplication possibilities, as well as internally, right? Leveraging our organization's internal strengths and pockets of excellence. And we've seen so many marvelous examples of this over the last 2+ months, right? Labatt's. So their core competency is sort of bottling liquids, and they pivoted pretty quickly into helping us out with making hand sanitizer. Or Bauer, right? They do face protection. And so they sort of shifted from hockey helmets, right, to health shields for all our frontline workers. And even all our local farms, right? So many farms have pivoted, and it's awesome. Because I don't know if you're like me, but I love going to those local farmers markets to get fresh fruit and vegetables. And so many of those farmers have actually collectively joined together to create virtual platforms so they can deliver us their fresh, amazing organic food online, right? So we buy it online and have it delivered. So just great examples of leveraging sort of opportunity and also internal strengths and core competencies. And love to hear some of your examples when we get to the Q&A. So third pain point, finding team leadership challenging. So this is sort of the question of how do we get our team inspired and motivated and rowing together amidst all the uncertainty. And the skill here is embracing emotions and trying shorter cycle action planning. So there's this great book that came out about a year ago called No Hard Feelings, The Secret Power of Embracing Emotions at Work. And it sort of launched a movement around taking more seriously and supporting sort of the emotional side of ourselves in our work life. And I love this visual from the book, right? What people kind of conventionally think being emotional means is sort of unprofessional and weak and irrational. But what it actually means is we are human. And especially now in this pandemic, I think being really supportive as leaders around the human side of what everybody's transitioning through. And Brene Brown, many of you may be familiar with her. She's got so many awesome books out and YouTube videos. One of her most recent is Dare to Lead, and it's a fabulous book if you haven't read it already. And she's really an amazing thought leader on vulnerability, right? And thinking about choosing courage over comfort. Love this quote, choosing our whole hearts over armor, and choosing the great adventure of being brave and afraid at the exact same time. So you might ask, well, what does that look like in an organizational context or as a leader? I think what that looks like is being more open, wholehearted and open, brave and afraid, and sharing those emotions, right? So if we're feeling anxious, to be sharing those emotions with our employees. You know, I know a lot of us are worried about this product line and will it survive? I'm worried too, and you know, I promise you I'm watching it, and we'll pivot together and figure out how to either make it succeed or alter it or transition it to something new. So it's about sharing those feelings and our anxiety, probably not overwhelming our employees with that, also being upbeat, but sharing some of those feelings so that folks realize it's a psychologically safe place for them to share their feelings. Another great principle from Brene Brown is assuming positive intent. And this is about sort of generosity of interpretation. So someone drops the ball, let's say on a project, or doesn't respond by email and you were expecting it, to take the most generous interpretation of that, to assume they're just doing the best they can and they're trying to figure things out just like each of us are, and that, you know, maybe what we need to do is support them at this point, say, hey, you know, sort of waiting on the end of that project or whatever the deliverable is. Can I help? Or what's going on with you? Or how are you doing? And a fourth one here around sort of leading more with emotion is head and heart check-ins. I've been doing these for years and I love them for just sort of bringing our holistic self to the forefront in a team setting, which enables us to work better together. So the head piece is just, you know, imagine you have your gallery and your Zoom gallery, and you just be going around the gallery asking each person to share a little bit about their head and heart. So maybe someone says, I'm really excited about this new service offering that we're in the midst of launching. That's their head. But their heart, I'm worried because someone at home is showing some symptoms of what we think might be COVID. Right, so to just go around a circle, sort of a head and heart check-in with everyone on our team. So that's a bit of the emotional side. And then a bit on the head side, shorter cycle action planning. And here we want to determine the cycle tempo that makes sense for our industry, our organization, our team. And I want to give a little shout out to Care Guide. My youngest daughter works for them, Care Guide. And they shared this template, which I thought was just fabulous. They're an awesome company doing innovative approaches to all kinds of home care for kids, for pets, and other services. I'm just going to shout out a few of their websites: Canadian Nanny, housekeeper.com, sitter.com, and Nanny Lane in the US. Anyway, she was actually living at the house for a bit, and I overheard her in one of these meetings, and I thought, wow, this is fabulous. So what they're doing is monthly priorities where teams are driving what's a successful, for example, may look like. Weekly goals and focus reinforced with a morning huddle, and I'm going to drill down on that in just a second. And then daily objectives, tasks, and experiments, which team members own and drive, right? So in a time when maybe our quarterly plans and even our 2-year, 3-year, 5-year strategic plans maybe aren't resonating quite so much, this shorter cycle action planning enables us to keep everyone sort of aligned and moving in the same direction. So just to drill down on the morning huddle, the idea, again, is you pick a cadence that's right for your team. So maybe the morning huddle is 3 times a week. I was speaking to someone in healthcare, and for them, the huddle is a couple times a day, right? So you pick the cadence that's right for your team. But maybe starting with a bit of a team connect, could be that head and heart check-in, could be as simple as what did you eat for breakfast? Then sharing team successes, celebrating some of the progress and wins from the previous week. What are some of the performance metrics looking like? And also the heart piece, right? Some acts of kindness or some unsung heroes from the past week. Then moving to team struggles, and this is great for psychological safety to be able to talk about these openly. Sort of what's keeping our team from doing its best, what's blocking our work, what's not working, what's stuck. And collectively, remember we talked about collective divergent brainstorming, collectively generating solutions. Then moving to the weekly goals and focus, you know, what are the areas we're going to focus on? What are the areas we're going to pivot on? How can we unblock some things? How can we measure success for the coming week? Much more of a shorter cycle action plan. Then who's going to take the lead on these different pieces? What kind of support do they need from the team or organization, and other collaboration meetings during the week to problem solve? And then a bit of a wrap up and a pump up. So just a bit of a template for what these huddles might look like that hopefully is helpful. And then during the week as leaders, we're still going to be doing our check-ins and pivots with our direct reports and our teams, but to have sort of this structure to keep us aligned. And we also want to, at the same time, block time for farther horizon scenario planning. So this focus is very much shorter cycle, And we don't want to lose sight of some of the fabulous ideas that may be bubbling up around things we can do down the pike. Some of the benefits of huddles like these, right? So much the emphasis on experimenting and learning and adapting and innovating, all things so important when we're in conditions of ultra-dynamic change. We get some alignment and clarity on our shorter term goals and deliverables. Transparency and multi-way communication, also so essential now. Real-time problem solving. Also helps us manage scope creep and costs, right? Because we have teams and individuals checking in maybe before they run on something that maybe is a little off focus right now, and we're sort of having a crisis over here we need to redirect energy towards. And really, it's sort of a supercharged after action review, what's working, what's not working, and suggestions for improvement, and enables us to also build in that social connection and teaming. So that's a bit about some tools, both emotional and also some sort of action planning tools for tackling this pain point of finding team leadership challenging. Alrighty, on to our fourth and last pain point, anxious about the future. If you're like me, we've all experienced this and bigger and smaller doses over the last 2+ months. So I'm gonna offer some tools that are really within our circle of control. We talked about that a little earlier in the talk, that we can do to maybe help us when we're feeling anxious. 3 I'm gonna feature are being present, capturing pull forwards, and gratitude. So this is really about sort of channeling our inner Zen, right? Amidst all the chaos, still channeling our inner Zen. So the first one, be present, and there's tons of research on this, right? Just 45 seconds lowers our blood pressure, helps us focus and concentrate, slows our heartbeat, and it can be as simple as a really deep breath, right? And being present is maybe thinking about that moment where air turns to breath, or thinking about how that breath feels in our lungs, right? Really paying attention. For the yogis out there, right? That's really what a yoga practice is all about, right? How do we sort of stay focused and be present amidst the swirl of what's happening around us? It might also be just a big sigh. Right? Letting go of something maybe that's not serving us and making a little space for something new or better. Or it might be just pausing to really observe the details. Like on this daffodil, right? The way the sun is coming through the grass, the outline of the petals, those white petals, so delicate. Or in the middle there, those anthers, those are those little pollen producing, pollen transporting little things. I've just learned that recently, right? So really paying attention, just noticing, becoming aware. Okay, another sort of tool we can use. So the first is be present to sort of calm, quiet our anxiety. Another tool we can use is to capture our silver linings, right? Sort of the brighter aspects. There's so much tragedy and suffering, but there's also these silver linings that are emerging, to capture them and pull them forward for the future. So some of those silver linings, right? It might be, there's been so much cool coverage of sort of the planet recovering, right? Letting the planet breathe a bit more. How do we flatten the carbon curve? So maybe that's a silver lining, you know, that's starting to emerge, that we want to concentrate both individually and collectively a bit more on the future. It might be cherished family time, right? I know we've all been cooking more and hanging out more and going for spontaneous walks. How do we pull that forward and keep that going in the future? Even these webinars, right? This sort of emerged, and I think they're just a fabulous way to enable us all to connect and share ideas and thoughts. So what are some of the silver linings and pull forwards? And I just want to share a quote by Elizabeth Lesser on this. This is from a book called Broken Open, How Difficult Times Can Help Us Grow. It's a book that's been out for a while, but I recently rediscovered it. How strange that the nature of life is change, yet the nature of human beings is to resist change. And how ironic that the difficult times we fear might ruin us are the very ones that can break us open and help us blossom into who we were meant to be. So sort of how can we help ourselves blossom, and what are those silver linings that can help us move forward into the future. And the last one I want to share is gratitude, right? So love this quote from Maya Angelou, great poet. This is a wonderful day. I've never seen this one before, right? So it sort of ties into be present, but it's then being thankful around that, be present. And, you know, so many of us may have seen these gratitude rocks. They're all scattered around my neighborhood. And just such a lovely community shared collective example of gratitude. And we can do this individually or shared, the gratitude thing, right? So just taking a little time every day, I actually like to start my morning this way before I even get out of bed, is just take a minute to be grateful. 3 to 5 things, that's all it takes. Just sort of just start the day in a wonderful way, right? Couple things that we're grateful for. I know for all of us, it's the frontline heroes and the heroes in grocery stores and other places that aren't just the medical heroes. The medical heroes are amazing, but there's so many other people helping us during this pandemic, and to be grateful for them. The signs of spring, spring and summer have been a little slow this year, but it's so reassuring, right? Just gratefulness to see the trees blossoming and the flowers blooming, sort of continuity amidst all the turbulence. And even how this pandemic is strengthening all of our agility skills, right? We're all being challenged on resilience and agility. And that's something we can be grateful for, that it's building that inner strength in all of us to tackle the changes the future may hold. And finally, on the gratitude, just want to sort of think about, and some others have been talking about this, and I found it so resonating, is this physical distancing, which so many of us are seeing as quite an imposition on our lives, right? To think about, be grateful that we can physically distance. Like, we are privileged to be able to physically distance. There's so many people, the homeless, the frontline heroes, people who live in more densely populated regions of the world, right? Who don't have the option of how to, of being able to physically distance. So we can even be grateful for physical distance. Okay, so that wraps up the pain points. I'm just going to do a little bit of a recap, and then we'll open everything up to questions. So first pain point was feeling overwhelmed or paralyzed. And our tips and tools were that important urgent prioritization matrix and the circle of control, influence, and observation. Second was struggling with reinvention, and our tools and tips are that collective divergent brainstorming and scanning externally, looking for those opportunities while leveraging our internal strengths and core competencies. Third one was around finding team leadership challenging, and we've got sort of the emotional side around vulnerability and assuming positive intent in those head and heart check-ins. And then sort of more of the planning side around sort of shorter cycle action plans and the huddles. And finally, anxious about the future and some tips and tools for that, the be present, the capture the silver linings and pull forwards, and gratitude. So hopefully this has sparked some thinking and provided some tips and tools for navigating some of the pain points we're all experiencing, and hopefully giving us a little more power to step into those ruby slippers. We started with Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz, to step into those ruby slippers and carve out a yellow brick road for the future that's better and brighter for all. So thank you so very much. I'm just going to pop up my LinkedIn and my email address, and I'm going to hand it back over to Preet to share some questions. We'll sort of move into the question portion of this.
Thanks, Ellen. That was a great piece. I'm already feeling the nice after yoga feeling after listening to you. So we have a few questions, and just to reiterate, we are still open to your questions. So do feel free to send anything, any thoughts you may have in the chat. In the meantime, we'll start with some questions. One question was very specific to your slide, which was slide 6. It says, how do we define urgent and important? Are these mutually exclusive? Just an example in mind, an unimportant activity that is not done on time because of procrastination may end up being important because it is now urgent? What is wrong with this example?
Yeah, love that question. That's a great question. Thank you so much for that. So yes, the definitional piece of the urgent important matrix, given the time I didn't go into, but that's really important. It's going to vary by context. So if we're working as a team, you know, we might want to collectively sort of think about, would it be, for example, is important have to do with risk and costs or reversibility or must have versus nice to have? So that is a static matrix. You're absolutely right. And things will sort of float through that over time. It's really a starting matrix to sort of get us out of feeling overwhelmed and paralyzed. But it's hopefully a revisiting matrix in the sense of then we could revisit it and sort of remap. So as you mentioned, something might move from sort of being not urgent to being urgent because we procrastinate on it. So absolutely, we got to take some time to define urgent and important, and we need to do it dynamically. Great question. Thank you for that.
Yeah, and that first question was from Gautam Sinha. I think I forgot to mention.
Former student. Hello.
So the next question also is related to some of to the paradox of thinking. And this is from Mike Feldman, who asks, how do we balance sharing those feelings of concern / fear with intentionally promoting optimism?
Yeah, great question. Another terrific question. And I think you're already signaling sort of the right leadership approach. I think thinking about balance. And so even when we're feeling a bit more overwhelmed, we probably don't want to really just dump all of that on those who work with us. And when we're feeling up, to sort of share the up. So I do think the notion of balance and support, and we probably want to lean a bit towards the optimistic bend, but still provide space and room for folks to share their feelings and for us to sort of see if there's possible solutions that maybe can help. Another fabulous question. Thank you.
Okay. So next, a couple of questions are related to teams or collective. So first question is, why is collective solutioning so important to reinvention?
Yeah, that's a great question. The collective piece, I'm a big believer in that all the time. And as those of you who've taken my courses, you know that the collective solutioning, we get the best ideas, and we also build passion and commitment. And the folks generally who come up with the ideas have really wonderful ideas for execution as well. So there's so many benefits, but particularly now, when things are moving even more rapidly, it's so important for us to do the solutioning collective. And also people are feeling a bit more isolated, right? With so many folks working remote. And so that collective piece becomes even more essential in my view. Yeah, thank you for that question. Another awesome question.
So a related question from an anonymous attendee,
okay.
Who says, you spoke a lot about teams. Any thoughts about the owner, operator, solo entrepreneur?
Yeah, so the owner, operator, solo entrepreneur, you don't have your team to support you, but hopefully, you know, one of the things maybe that would come out of this is that you do build that network of support if you don't have it already. I do think we all sort of need an umbrella of support. And so as the solo operator, to really, and maybe even cultivate consciously, you know, you probably know people who own their businesses as well, is to sort of say, maybe you want to set up a weekly sort of chat and share and support and innovate brainstorming session. So I think we all need ideas from other places, and it's a big burden to bear if you're a solo operator. So one tip might be to sort of build your own collective and community to help for that.
The next one is kind of a little broader, which is from Khaled Hassan, who writes, Ellen, thanks for an amazing presentation. As you know, the world is walking through anxiety, in quotes, different in different countries, Asia versus Africa and North America versus Europe. How to address?
Wow, that's a really big question. I think small changes, big impacts is part of the solution. Like, I think all of us doing what we can personally, but also in terms of give back to the rest of the world. So many of us probably watching this webinar, we're sort of in a privileged position in this pandemic. And so thinking about how can we reach out and help in other regions of the world that are struggling so much. We're struggling, but there's regions of the world that are having a tougher time. And thinking about sort of how can we provide support to help lower anxiety, not only here, wherever we are, because I know you're coming from all over the world, but within sort of our own cocoon, but also much broader than that. Yeah, that's a great question. And I actually think, we have a talk coming up next week, or later this week, actually. Brent Lyons is talking about sort of a more global picture on the inequality, and he might be speaking to that issue of anxiety. Thank you for the question. Great question.
Yeah, the next question is from Rodrigo Teles Rios, and this is on your circle of control. The question is, could you elaborate more on the strategies and tools we can use to push the boundaries of our circle of control?
Yeah, so that's also a great question. So, I think we do have a circle of control, and one of the things that we can do, especially in these dynamic conditions, is sort of continually experiment and test what maybe we can try that reaches into the circle of influence, right? So by running experiments, we can start to see, maybe that product line works now. It didn't work 4 weeks ago, but now it's working. So it's sort of becoming within our circle of control. I also think the creative brainstorming piece is so important. So sometimes our circle of control is more constrained feels more constrained than it actually is. So by being really creative and thinking out of the box, we can often find a different path around our circle of control into the circle of influence. Great question. Thank you.
The next one is from Johnson Jose Matthew. The question is, collective ideation is great since it generates a lot of ideas. How about collective judgment? Do you think it will filter out the best ideas rather than just one or two leaders on top? Usually the ones collecting the ideas, having the power to judge.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's some mechanisms we can use to offset that. So for example, even in our virtual gallery, if we only ask for ideas openly from sort of those most powerful, we may get a subset of ideas. But I think if we really go around the gallery and ask for everyone's input, or ask for input on chat or Q&A if we're using Zoom, so that we, first of all, get the great ideas. But then the second piece of your question around how do we prevent leaders from filtering out maybe some of the good ideas that we think have a lot of traction, that might take some pitching and might take some really hardcore analysis around what are sort of the business benefits of pursuing that idea. So yeah, a couple things. How do we gather the ideas, but then also pitching really concretely the benefits and tapping into whatever those leaders resonate with most. So for some, it might be the numbers. For others, it might be a vision of the future. So tailoring and customizing our pitch to the leaders. Thank you.
Ashley Jung is wondering whether you have any advice for people who are entering a new workplace while working from home.
Another great question. So, that is a challenge actually, right? Because you don't have your typical onboarding. So maybe part of what you can do is sort of structure the equivalent of onboarding even from your end. So normally if you were onboarding, right, you'd probably meet all the different people of the organization and you'd sort of get a walk around and get to understand the product and the services. So maybe setting up one-on-ones with the folks that you'll be working with to just get to know each of them individually and a bit about sort of what are their roles and responsibilities. That'll be useful for you as you get on the job, and you may need to reach out to people, but also start to build the social connection that'll help you integrate and embed in the organization. Thank you.
So there's a question from Todd Reitzchin. Do you see this event as potentially changing society in terms of social equity, consumer culture, and current capitalist society?
Nice macro question. Okay, I'm going to go a bit personal here on my personal beliefs. My personal hope is that this COVID pandemic enables us all to sort of pause and reflect and think maybe a little bit about the frenzy of society that was pre-COVID and what a next chapter might look like. That's maybe better for all of us and better for the planet. So how can we really become a bit more community-centered, a bit more focused on the collective good, a bit more proactive about rescuing our planet that we all share? So sort of goes back to those silver linings. I do hope that we rethink some of those big macro questions, and all of us, not just political leaders, but all of us sort of rethink and rebalance a bit. I would personally love to see, you know, weekends sort of become weekends again, and all of us slow down just a little bit and take a breath. And, you know, some organizations have even started doing, for example, no meeting Wednesdays, because they realize we're all on Zoom all day long and we actually don't have no time to get the work done. And so how do we build time in for creative thinking? And how do we keep some of those benefits of family and friend and time with those who are close to us going? Great question.
John Costolas thanks you for a great presentation, and then goes on for the question: how would you propose to parents to unpack and address the inequality in work-life balance between them, typically heavier for working moms, which is often unconscious?
Yeah, there's a hot one. Okay, yeah, I do think that is an issue, actually. You know, historically, women have picked up more of the responsibilities. And I do think, you know, at a really micro level within every family, sort of saying, hey, what needs to be done now? And how do we enroll the kids? And how do we split this up in a way that makes sense between us? I think it's also happening organizationally, where women, some of the women I've been talking to, women leaders, are feeling the burden. So, you know, if people have been let go or taken, like, are only working maybe 80% of their jobs now, there's a lot of extra work in the organization, and women are also picking up a lot of that organizational work. And so, you know, I think it really is, it's funny because we were just doing this on my team with YCL, is we've been in this about 2+ months for all of us to sort of pause and reflect and think about, now that we're sort of getting used to the triage and the crisis, how do we collectively make good decisions about how we're going to continue to work given the pandemic and given all the changes? And so, and that includes, how do we divide up responsibilities both at work and at home? Thank you for a great question.
Going back to your concept of fragility, so would you say that there is any difference between individual agility versus organizational agility, and amongst the latter, if it's a private or a public? I mean, are there different levels of agility depending on what level we are talking about?
Yeah, there's absolutely different forms, right? And so in every context, and I think even in each of us actually as individuals, how we adapt our resilience, our responses, there are some patterns for sure, and there's tools and tips that help, but I think how we apply those tools and how resilience and fragility and morphing emerges absolutely varies by context, varies by level of analysis. So there are some themes and some generalities, but also tons of idiosyncrasies around fragility and resilience. Yeah.
So there's a question from Martha Hancock about our working on Zoom. So the question is, Zoom calls all day can be exhausting, and my impression is that productivity is currently quite low versus regular working from home. What's your impression, and how can productivity being measured in this context?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. And there's actually some research that I just saw the other day. I think it came out in HBR, but talking about, interestingly, most of us are working more hours a day but our productivity has gone down. And that's because every interaction requires a meeting. And so some of the things organizations are doing is blocking time to do the work, right? A lot of us are in meetings all day long and we actually have no time but at night to actually get the work done. So for example, maybe we block 12 to 2 every day, which is a no phone call zone. And we use that time to actually get the work done and sort of increase our productivity, use that for creativity. I think another thing that really helps is thinking about how we use communication channels. So consciously choosing when is email sort of off and you're not required to be paying attention? When is a lot of organizations use Slack? When can you snooze your Slack and actually get some work done? So I think really pragmatically thinking about how do we structure work under these conditions and ways that give us room to get the work done in addition to having all the meetings. And maybe it's also thinking a bit more proactively about when do we need a meeting versus just shooting somebody an email. We're so tempted to always be on Zoom meetings, but you're right, it is exhausting and it takes a lot of time to do the face-to-face all the time. We need to buffer that with some face-to-face. But yeah, it's a great question. Thank you.
So there's a question from Thao Lee. The question is, in general, what is the most popular pain point that employees face off now?
The most popular pain point that
employees face now. The most popular pain points.
Oh, of those 4, or yeah, is that what you mean?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. I don't know. I sort of crowdsourced those from a bunch of leaders, and I think we're all feeling a lot of those in different ways. It's interesting because when I first started sort of working on this talk a couple of weeks ago, I felt like the overwhelming and the anxious were just such dominant forces. But with the reopening starting to happen, I actually think that maybe the struggling with reinvention and the finding team leadership challenging pain points are sort of a bit more in the forefront. So yeah, that's sort of my view. I think we're all cycling through all of them all the time, but maybe with the reopening, we're doing more of the creativity and team leadership, focusing a bit more on that.
Okay. So there's a personal question for you from Emily Martino,
Okay.
Who asks, what's your favorite silver lining that helps motivate you?
Ooh, my favorite silver lining that helps motivate me. I think for me, that silver lining has to do with, okay, I'm getting personal here, sort of love of family and friends. And just the opportunity under COVID to have more of that and more time for that. And I found that super inspirational and super motivating in this time. Thank you.
So there's a question from Ashwin Joshi. How do we balance focusing on near-term challenges with focusing on long-term personal growth opportunities?
Okay, so you're jumping levels of analysis too, Ashwin. So, I think we have to do both. I think we have to, maybe the matrix helps, I think we have to sort of attack and address what's urgent and important. But I also think we really need to block time and systematically block time for future growth, individually and organizationally. And I know the future is very uncertain in a lot of sectors and industries, but I still think we can think about the future under different scenarios, right? We can use scenario sort of thinking to think about, if it's like this, what might we do? And so I think we always have to balance short-term and long-term. When we're in crisis mode and triage mode, we're going to be tipping that balance a bit more towards the short term, but definitely we have to protect time to think about where we're going, because that's so inspirational for us, right? And builds our optimism. Thank you, Ashwin, for that question.
So we are getting close to time. So I'll ask the last question, and then after that you can kind of conclude with your some thoughts.
Okay.
So the question is, you mentioned after-action reviews as one of the benefits of a huddle. Could you talk a bit more about how they work?
Yeah, so after action reviews, I'm a big believer in those as well. And I think we actually should embed them in every project and initiative we do. Just take the time at the end to say what worked well, transparently talk about what didn't, and probably most importantly, think about what would we do differently moving forward. And the Huddle actually has that sort of embedded. Under conditions of ultra-dynamic change, I think we need to be doing after action reviews even more, because so much is changing all the time and there's so much learning happening. So they're a great tool all the time. They're even a better tool now. I know some folks were given a shout out that they wanted some other readings. And so here's some other readings and resources, some of the books I talked about, but also some others and that you might want to check out. Harvard Business Review has these management tips of the day every day and the daily alert that are fabulous. And then a couple other books that I mentioned and some others. So I just wanted to take a moment to thank you so much, all of you, for joining us this afternoon and for your wonderful questions, comments, and insights. Also, a bit of a shout out to Ashwin Joshi for launching this series and inviting me, to my daughter Shannon Auster Weiss for her wonderful input and shaping of this content, to my daughter Lindsay Auster Weiss for her tips on slide design and delivery, to Raluca Lakatis and Hassan Shihata for all their help with deck prep, to Preet, you for awesome moderating, and to Vita and Cecilia for all their logistical and tech support. I hope that everyone has gained a few tips and tools and ideas that will help them navigate this ultra dynamic change in the days and weeks to come. Feel free to reach out to me at my email address that was posted a bit before, or on LinkedIn. And enjoy the rest of your Tuesday. And I hope you join us for some of the great webinars that are coming up. Brent Lyons later this week on inequality, and Jim Clayton on how COVID is impacting our cities. And that's next Tuesday, that one. So thank you so very much. And I hope to see you at the next one.
Thanks, Ellen, for those great insights, and also for linking what we have heard in the past with some of the things that are coming up in the future. So thanks so much for this stimulating session. So just a couple of quick points before we leave today. One is I want to bring to your attention our next webinar on Thursday, which Professor Auster already mentioned. So the topic is inequality and a response to COVID, with a session leader, Professor Brent Lyons from Schulich. And then finally, I want to reiterate that if you have any questions regarding the webinar series or the programs, or if you're a current student or a prospective student, please feel free to connect with us through these websites or through various social media platforms. And other than that, thanks again to everyone who has joined us from all over the world. And we look forward to seeing you or hearing from you next Thursday, this Thursday, with a new webinar. And thanks again, Ellen.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you so much.